my guest, I'm telling you, I have so many questions. But I first want to welcome the program my co-host, Jason, the public school guy. Jason, how are you? I know when you hear that we're going to have someone from the Reagan administration, you're very intrigued for sure. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
All right, and Peter Elvidge. Peter, how are you? Happy New Year to you, and we'll get right into introducing our guest.
Yeah, doing well, and Happy New Year to you guys. I know it's been a little bit since I've been on, but I'm ready for this show.
All right, well, fantastic. We're excited to welcome to the program, and she is the former Reagan administration expert in national security, Karna Small-Bodman. Karna, thanks for calling, and it's an honor to have you on the show. And it's amazing to look at your career, where it started, and now where it is. It spans a lot of different experiences, doesn't it?
Well, thanks, Neil, and thank you, Jason. Hey, good to have you along here for this conversation. Glad to be on board, and I'm happy to talk about days working for President Reagan and experiences I had there, some that were pretty unbelievable at times. But we'll chat about about books, about today's events, anything that you would like to talk about tonight.
Hey, you sound like we could tell you're a journalist, and that's the point. So I think, did you start your career in journalism? Is that how you started out?
Well, you're right. My first job was in San Francisco way back, probably before you guys were born, but in any event. This is out of college. I was out in San Francisco, and I worked first as a reporter and television news anchor for first the NBC state. Well, actually, okay, let me be totally honest here. The first job, the only job they would let me have in the beginning, was doing the weather, okay? Did the weather.
Hey, I was a weatherman. I'm down for that.
But look, I learned how to talk to a camera, okay? Then I became a reporter and a television news anchor, and then I was on the air for off and on for about 15 years. And then later I moved to Washington, D.C., and as a matter of fact, people say, well, how in the world did you ever end up in the Reagan White House? Well, the reason is that when I was on the air, it was the late 70s, way back in California, and that's when Reagan was governor back then. So I had a chance to interview him several times and had his people on various shows. And when I moved to Washington, I was there. I had a job doing the late news in D.C. on Channel 5, and whenever his folks would come to town during the run-up to the campaign and the election, there again, I'd have him on my shows. So I got to know them pretty well, and then when Reagan was elected, I, out of the blue, got a call from James Baker, who was the incoming chief of staff, who I hadn't met, but I'd evidently been recommended by the Reagan people from Sacramento. That's how it all happened.
See, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. And I'm going to have one question, then Jason will jump into a question. Let's kind of stick into the topic because we have so much information. And being on the air just with Karna for 1 hour is not enough time. I think I'm sure I've not checked all your stuff. We got to talk about your book for sure tonight. But I mean, you're a variety of information and different situations. So when you were interviewing President Reagan, you must have, before he was president as governor, you must have hit it off well with him, right? In the interviews.
Well, yes. I think that what perhaps an impression that his staff had, at least, and perhaps he did as well, and the reason I was invited to come in for an interview in any event later, I had never worked on the campaign. I was not a political person at that point, but I was, of course, in the news and all over it. But I wanted to be fair, okay? I would argue with my news director all the time. If you're going to have 20 seconds of Teddy Kennedy, okay, I want 20 seconds of, a Republican on the other side. And we'd get into some pretty decent arguments because, as you might imagine, San Francisco newsroom, I was kind of a lonely person.
Yes.
I mean, look, we all have friends who are Republicans and Democrats of all stripes, but quite honestly, back then, we had a lot of kids, well, young people, out of, let's put it this way, the free speech movement in Berkeley, working in the newsroom, that identified as Marxist. And so you can imagine we might have had a few disagreements over how to put a news story together. So I tried to be fair with Reagan, and I guess they figured he was getting a fair shake. So I guess that put me in one of the more unusual categories when they were looking for people for the press operation initially.
Now, Jason, the public school guy, is a tremendous Reagan fan, right, Jason? Go ahead. He's a history teacher, by the way, so that's the other interesting point. He's very knowledgeable, poli-sci. Yes, he's very knowledgeable.
Well, let's just say we come from different backgrounds, and we may agree to disagree on a few things, but that's okay.
That's okay.
No, I'm fine with that. Believe me. As far as when you got into the National Security Council, when you started doing press for the National Security Council, you get in, you start working in that way. How much was the learning curve for you to get caught up on the topics and being able to articulate the argument that the Reagan administration wanted to have to the public?
Oh, absolutely. Very good question, Jason. Well, first of all, let me explain. When I first went in, initially in the first week of January of '81, I went in as deputy press secretary, Deputy Jim Brady, and the other deputy was Larry Speaks. There were two of us. So I started out in general more on the domestic side. Okay, so for 2 years I was handling domestic issues, but you're inside the White House. You're watching everything that happens.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was, first a huge learning curve. I mean, good Lord, I didn't even know where the back door was. It was really tough when I walked in. Others had worked in previous administrations and knew their way around the West Wing. I didn't. And I do remember a comment that a member of the press office staff said, because there's so much going on all the time, different issues hitting you back and forth, Congress, allies, world leaders, events, and so forth. And he said, man, working here, it's kind of like standing on the side of the railroad tracks and watching the freight train go by and trying to memorize the numbers on the boxcars. kind of the feeling you had. But then after the tragic events when we lost the services of Jim Brady, which I could go back, I could tell you a story about that in a minute. We switched a lot of jobs around, and I eventually did switch over to foreign policy and became a senior director and spokesman for the NSC, as you mentioned. So I had, initial ideas about how the world worked, at least how the presidency worked. But then, yes, there was a learning curve. You do a tremendous amount of reading. You really do. I was taking briefing books home with me almost every night. I mean, there's no end to all the things that you could and probably should be reading. News summaries starting at 6 in the morning and all of that. So, then you have to learn how to boil it down. Okay, could you please explain our Mideast policy in one page of talking points? Good luck. But we did. Yeah. We had to do that. One of the jobs I had was, among other things, was putting the briefing book together for the president in advance of all his press conferences to deal with foreign policy. So, yes.
And in the foreign policy conversation, trust me, we're going to get to that, especially national security. But Peter, do you have a question for Karna? And we're going to kind of go back and forth again on the Neil Haley Show, again with Karna Small-Bodman here on the Neil Haley Show, author of Trust But Verify. We're going into her days at the Reagan administration. Peter, what question do you have for Karna?
Yeah, I was just curious. So, in the midst of looking at, documentation, obviously there's tons to read, there's tons to consume. Do you have, a particular process to, so to speak, find the tidbits that you really need to know about versus, the extra paragraphs and things? Kind of basically, like you said, breaking it down to the very specific. Did you have kind of a method to the madness, so to speak?
Well, before, when you're putting... For example, before a news conference, as I just mentioned, we would get briefing papers from the various agencies I mean, I wasn't pulling it out of the Washington Post. I was pulling it out of the Pentagon, out of the CIA, out of the State Department, the Treasury Department. The actual policies that were being proposed, those that had been passed, those that they felt we should do or should not do, and so forth. And those are the important. Those are the points that you go through, and then you try to distill them into some interesting, as I say, talking points. And then what we'd do, we'd put all that together, and of course the poor president has got to, go through as much as he can, and you can't burden him with a gajillion points. You got
right.
figure out he makes a few excellent points. And then what we would do is we would get together with him. The three of us would sit at a table in front of a podium over in the Family Theater there at the White House. And the president would come in the day before. This is a major news conference, not just off-the-cuff comment, of course, major news conference. And the senior staff would then be behind us, and the three of us would ask him all the crazy questions that we sensed that the White House press corps would ask, because we had been, in and out of the press room all the time, and we know what we're being bombarded with. So we would hit him with those questions and see how much he could pull out of his memory bank or his, list of priorities or principles, or what he learned in the briefing book we had given him. So it was quite an extensive exercise. That's nothing new. I mean, everyone goes through that. You call it a murder board.
Wow.
I mean, that's, preparation,
And preparation and research. But let's talk about, when you talk about the transition, you kind of mentioned that whole factor thrown into when you thought, I'm just going to be involved in the press, right? Going to being part of the National Security Council, you had to learn a lot about foreign policy and how much research and thought process came in, especially when we talk about, and that's the one thing I mentioned on off the air, and I'm not meaning you had to watch it, but you should watch it. It's a lot of fun, and some of the questions, the Russians on FX, I'm binge watching it right now, and it's amazing to look at specifically certain tidbits that they talked about with the Reagan administration involving Russians and how much we were fearing the Russians at that time, especially when President Reagan came into office, or not fearing, but really guarding against. And this is really a change in foreign policy in a lot of ways, right? Correct? The way we're handling things compared to Carter. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, yeah. Okay, wait. So I understand your question.
Yeah,
You're saying that the Reagan staff was handling it different, as you said, compared to the Carter staff.
Yes, exactly.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well, of course.
Yeah.
And now it's interesting. You probably, especially Jason, being the history buff here, will remember a line that Reagan had and has been repeated over the decades. This actually happened. Let me go back and just tell you a quick story. During the transition period, various people, experts, were invited to go out and to Sacramento and be interviewed by the president, of course, for various positions. That's what you do for all the cabinet and so forth. And one of the people that was invited to go out and speak with him was, at that time, a well-known scholar, Richard Allen. And he was being interviewed as a possible national security advisor. I mean, he was one of several people. So he goes out there, and as he tells the story, first he explained all of the points that he had studied and thought what he felt about dealing with the Russians and in the Middle East policy in South America and various places. And Reagan listened to him and so forth. And then Reagan, at the end of a couple of hours of all of this, turned to Dick Allen. He said, "Okay, now I've asked you a lot of questions. I get your positions here, and they're pretty hard line, and I think we're pretty much in agreement here. But let me just ask, do you have any questions of me?" And Dick Allen looked at him and he said, "Yes, sir. Yes, Governor. Just a simple question. How would you handle the Russians?" And Reagan looked over, and without blinking an eye, he said, "It's very simple. We win, they lose." And Dick Allen said, "At that moment, I signed up."
Wow. All right, so Jason, let's get.
So it was. I mean, I'm
You're-
being a little bit lighthearted here, but it's the true story. No, Reagan actually had developed his sense of not just domestic policy, which he was really into, but his sense of dealing with communism, which he felt so strongly against. He, as you all know, during the administration, coming up with trying to relegate it to the dustbin of history, calling it the evil empire, even telling lighthearted and telling jokes even about how inefficient and awful the system of communism was. But mainly he was concerned with their human rights records and all the rest. And put on top of that, they're building their arsenal. In fact, when we came into office, they actually had a 3-to-1 advantage over us in the largest ballistic missiles. And they were mucking around, if you remember back, all over the third world countries. They were running around in Cuba and Nicaragua and all kinds of places, running their tanks into Afghanistan and all the rest. So Reagan, they were on the march, and Reagan wanted to stop it. And he instituted a number of policies, really tough ones. You talk about today, we have sanctions and so forth, but boy, then did we ever work hard. And one of the main things that fascinated me at the time was his announcement of his Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, missile defense. You probably remember that. It's a big deal in the news today. And he was fascinated with that concept. And at the time that he made the announcement in his famous speech where he said, let's task our best scientific minds to try to stop a missile and that sort of thing, everybody thought he was nuts. I mean, everybody, the State Department's way, think he's Superman, a bullet hitting a bullet. It's not going to work, but that's okay. We'll use it as a bargaining chip, and we'll bargain it away for some of their SS-18s and SS-20 missiles. Well, at the time, of course, he wasn't going to do that. And then over at the Pentagon, they didn't think it was going to work either, but they said, hey, wait a minute. We'll bargain it away, but what we'll do is we'll put contracts out with defense contractors to see if somebody can put this thing together. And it'll cost a lot of money, but that will force the Soviets to spend a lot of money, and it'll help bankrupt their system. And, of course, a lot of that worked.
Right.
And you look back in history, and you will see that they were so afraid of our technology that they tried to imitate us. And, of course, a lot of their economy kept going downhill from there. It really did.
Now, Jason, when we talk about history and how you're teaching about Reagan and stuff in history, what questions do you have for Karna regarding especially national security at that time?
Well, what's interesting is actually when I went to graduate school, I worked with a guy who worked in Reagan's CIA, so I got a little bit of inside information as far as that was concerned. But that being said, the one thing that intrigues me most about that period of time is the Nicaragua, Honduras, Iran-Contra kind of thing, and how that played itself out. Not for the if you think about it from the political savvy aspect of it, that the use of one conflict to help solve another conflict, and all of those kinds of things. How much did you participate in that part of the Reagan foreign policy? And do you have any tidbits or inside stories you'd be willing to share?
Well, let me put it this way. I was not a part of the so-called Iran-Contra deal. That was an extremely privately held project. I wasn't in on the planning and really didn't even know about it. None of the staff did, except for, as I said, just a very few people even knew about it until it was announced. And it was announced. It broke. Let me put it that way. The story broke 2 months after I left the administration. I left in September of '86. I'd been there for 6 years, and it broke in November. So that was very tough. Of course, I got barraged by questions, but I really didn't have the details. Now, having said that, the the events leading up to it, I remember many things because one of the catalysts of all of that, is I'm sure your friend of the CIA told you, was Reagan's deep concern over the fate of hostages, our people who had been taken by militants in the Middle East. They took many, I'm thinking of a dozen maybe names at this time, over a period of time. So they were holding them there, and Reagan was desperate to free our people. Some were members of the CIA, some were others, some were just, ministers over there that had been grabbed off the street. And he was desperate to free them. And there were a number of people in Iran, not in the elite administration, but the so-called moderates who would like to have taken over, who said to us, "Hey, I bet we might be able to be middlemen here and try to negotiate to get your people out." And that was really the genesis of the whole thing. Trying to free the people because they were being tortured. We knew that. It was a horrible situation. And Reagan kept saying to his people, look, do whatever you can, get our people out of there. If you got to negotiate with some people, fine, but oh my God, do something. That's how it started.
And it's interesting to listen to Jason and your expertise, Karna, regarding, again, the Reagan administration at that time, and even for you to talk about how, much he had a hard line on specific things. But I know Peter has a question, but I'm going to come back to some more questions again. We're talking again with Karna Small-Bodman here on the Neil Haley Show, talking about the Reagan administration, and also we're going to talk about her book later in the show. Peter, what question do you have for Karna?
Yeah, well, I know it's kind of a basic question. I'm just curious because, I'm, slightly ignorant. I'm not so much of a history person, so I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts in the sense of like being a part of different things, and like this being, situations and conflicts, things like that. How would you handle, like, for instance, if there's disagreements between you and other staff, to solve different issues? Like, was that difficult in your case or not so much, or was that handled by someone else, would you say?
What, you mean where there were differences among different staff people over policy and so forth? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let's say you had different views on particular sets of action or things of that nature to take care of different scenarios or issues. Yeah.
Well, of course, it wasn't our... Oh, boy, how am I going to put this? It wasn't quite our job to... I wasn't in a position of making policy, so to speak, but more in a position of explaining it. And I will say this. There are many times, almost every other day, that the president would have a speech, remarks, so forth, prepared for whatever. From a State of the Union to a speech overseas to, someplace that he would be talking about. And when I was at the NSC, one of my responsibilities was to go through prepared remarks, and of course he wrote a lot of them too. But prepared remarks that would be, well, what they have to do is be cleared. Let's say there's going to be a major speech, and it would get cleared by the State Department, cleared by the Pentagon, and cleared by us to make sure that there weren't any mistakes when it came to policies and all that sort of thing. And yeah, we would have disagreements maybe with speechwriters at the Pentagon. Now, how could you suggest he put this in here and all that? You go back and forth, but the president had the final say. And I'll remind you all how the public learned how some of this came down. And the classic example was there was a speech the president was going to give in Germany, and it went through clearance, as I said, at the State Department and other agencies. It came back to the president, and he put a line in the speech, and it went back to State. They lined it out. Came back to the president. It happened 3 times. Finally, the way I got the story from Mike Deaver, they're in the car on the way to the speech, in Germany. And Reagan said, "I'm sorry, I'm saying it." Because I want to say it, and it was Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I was curious too on this note. How much of like speeches or like the public speaking on the president's behalf is considered pre-planned versus specifically his words? I'm just curious.
Well, he did a tremendous amount of he gave a tremendous amount of input. Because he would meet with the speechwriters before a major thing. I'm not talking about just off the cuff to the Boy Scouts or something, but no, for major speeches, they always would go in, a couple of them, to the Oval Office and have a whole session with him on what are the major points you want to make, Mr. President, on this, that, or the other. Oh, no, let me give an example, because from the very first day, a lot of the press were saying, "Oh, he's like a cowboy from Hollywood. What does he know? He's used to being handed a script." I'm sure, y'all probably heard that, and they probably still say it today or something. Well, I'll never forget this. The very first day of business, the inauguration was January 20th, so on the 21st, we're all there, first day of work, so to speak. And wondering, oh my God, what do I do next? This is the first day on the job. And Jim Brady, the press secretary, calls me into his office. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, first thing. Maybe it was even earlier than that. And he turns to me and he says, "Go down to the press room and get the 3 mags and their photographers and bring them up here." I didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, what he wanted to do, he meant 3 magazines. So I go downstairs and I get the chief correspondents for Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News. I said, and hey, bring the photographers. So they think, oh, hey, we're going to get a story. Great. So they come upstairs. We go in the West Wing press office, and Jim has in his hand a bunch of pages, about 12 pages of the yellow legal pad, from a tablet, like, legal size pages. Mm-hmm. And he fans them out on the floor like a bridge hand. Fans them out on the floor. He says, "Okay, boys, take a picture." I said, "What's he doing?" And I kind of looked over, and they didn't know what they got down on their hands and knees, and they took close-ups of these 12 pages. And what it was 12 handwritten pages, Reagan's handwritten inaugural address. And Jim was making the point that his very first action of giving this address was something that the initial speech, later put on teleprompter, but his initial speech was this handwritten speech in Reagan's own hand. I thought that was a brilliant move for the first story of the day.
It definitely is.
Yeah, most definitely.
Now,
so tremendous.
Now, again, Karna, from that process, you move on, finishing up the administration. Mm-hmm. What do you think you learned from national security being part of that administration? National security wise, because
so much.
I mean, like in looking at it and how it connects to your books today, and we'll talk about that in your fiction writing. But let's kind of look first of all about what did you learn from national security that way that made you a national security expert after finishing up, when you first thought you're going to be more involved in the press and you never knew it was going to be foreign policy and learning about our national security.
Well, I did learn a lot. I certainly wouldn't put myself forward as a, quote, expert. I mean, many people, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, those are the experts. I was learning as much as I could to arrange briefings and to sit in on them and so forth and try to distill some of the points. But I wouldn't call myself an expert. But it was a tremendous experience. It really was. And it gave me such a love of learning about all these issues, try to keep up with them. I really did. I mean, I'm kind of I've been a news junkie anyway all my life, and I've been fascinated to watch things evolve. And one of the things I learned that Reagan was absolutely right about, and that was some of it, call them phrases, but because we remember them, and it was peace through strength. And he felt very strongly about that. We had peace, but he said it was through strength, because nobody's going to attack you when you're the strongest guy in the block, right? and he felt very strongly. So he built up our defenses, and I saw his reasoning behind his various moves, and they were successful. I mean, look, the disintegration of the Soviet Union. He, at the time when he pushed human rights, he encouraged free movements around the world in all kinds of places. He worked with Lech Walesa over in Poland, which brought about the Soviets backing off and leaving many of those countries to be free finally of domination. And more people were actually living in free societies when he left office, millions and millions more than when he came in. And that was one of he believed, his crowning achievements.
All right, now I'm going to go to the historian, and this is going to be where the fun conversation goes, Karna, as we're kind of going more and more to life after the Reagan administration. But I'm going to ask Jason,
sure,
from what you've heard from Karna firsthand, what would you say your historical point of view when it comes to Reagan and national security, in your opinion, in his administration, Jason?
Well, you can't deny his accomplishments. You have to put him up amongst the best, most accomplished foreign policy presidents of all time. You absolutely cannot deny his accomplishments. That's for sure. And yes, he should be, and he's rightfully should be credited for the stopping of the Cold War and many of the foreign policy accomplishments we have in our history. What I'm interested in seeing what Karna might have a point of view on is, like, currently, what would you say our most pressing issue is foreign policy-wise?
Well, I would say foreign policy-wise, well, we have challenges all over the world, of course.
Yes,
a number of them. Okay, and first of all, from 3 different countries, I would say. We have the problems with North Korea, which have been festering, for decades, as we very well know. And unfortunately, in the past, all the talks, the 6-party talks that they had during Bush years, and all kinds of other things, never worked because that dictator, the various Kim dictators, simply wanted relief and wanted economic help, and they would promise things. They broke every promise they ever made. And that's been a very unfortunate situation. So now here they have this buildup of nuclear, power and missiles and so forth and so on. At least now I will credit the current administration with being tough and having sanctions put on them and trying to and getting the Europeans to cooperate in some ways, as many ways. There's a whole lot of work to be done, but at least we saw just today the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, has offered a new overture, if you will, in his New Year's address, saying that they are refraining from producing nuclear weapons and right now, and talking about another opening for more talk. So it's very small, heck of a lot of work to be done, but okay, that's one. Number 2, you've got China with tremendous push on the part of this particular Chinese leader what they really want to do is build their country up to truly be a leader. One of the experts in that field, or true expert, Michael Pillsbury, wrote a book recently that hit the New York Times list called The 100-Year Marathon, pointing out how patient the Chinese are and the way that they are building up their businesses, their technology, and their influence around the world. And they are very patient, and of course they steal technology all over the place. And finally, our country is hopefully doing something about it, really being tough on them. And in the past, I don't think we heard a whole lot about any administration, Republican or Democrat, coming down this hard on their actions, the trade actions, the stealing of technology. So China is a heck of a problem. And then, of course, Russia. And I've been fascinated with all things Russian ever since, my days back with Reagan, because I had a chance to go to arms control talks and see them in action, and then follow along with, to see how they operate, and it really was an incredible experience, and that led me. I know you mentioned books and things, but I do write thrillers. I write political thrillers, and they were inspired after I got out of the White House by some of these experiences, especially with the Russians and the idea of missile defense, which we mentioned a few minutes ago. I wrote my first book about that. But they're thrillers, but each one focuses on a different national security threat.
And that's fascinating.
So that's what I'd like to do now.
And then what I'm waiting on is, Karna, how great your books are having success. Let's put them together and on Netflix or different things like that. And we'll talk about that, especially when I'm a big fan of Jack Ryan on Amazon and stuff like that. I'm streaming a lot of different things, and it's really interesting to look at, particularly enough those things. But Peter, I'm going to jump to a question to you. Then we're going to go life after the Reagan administration. Peter, one more question regarding Karna and her time in the White House. Peter, what's the question? What question do you have for Karna?
Well, I'm always a big fan of, seeing people overcome their challenges and recognizing their challenges and seeing how they've, really excelled. So I just have a really, small question. It's like, what would you say has been your biggest challenge, and how did you get over it by chance?
Oh my. There's so many. I mean, you live a long life and you have challenges throughout, and you try to live through them.
True.
First, of course, going into the White House and trying to learn, how to operate when I had never worked even for a candidate on a campaign. That was a huge learning curve, and there are ups and downs. Who's in the meeting and who's not, and who's in the loop, and so forth. You learn to deal with that, and all of that. But in fact. One thing, this is slightly off topic here, but it just popped into my mind when you're talking about challenges. One thing, living through a particular experience that happened early on in the administration taught me so much, and also, inspired writing and so forth, happened 9 weeks after the inauguration of President Reagan. Because I was scheduled to be in the car with Jim Brady on March 30th to go to a speech at the Hilton Hotel for a union group, and stayed back at the last minute and spent the day in the Situation Room taking notes. And, of course, that was the day when Reagan walked out of the Hilton that John Hinckley fired 6 shots in 3 seconds combat style using a smaller gun, a .22, but a bullet that he thought would explode inside the victim. He called it a devastation bullet. I would have been standing right there, probably right next to Jim and the president when those shots were fired.
Oh, my gosh.
And I've often wondered, why was I spared? I stayed back at the very last minute to do some research for the next briefings and to return press calls. It was an amazing, as you can imagine, day, situation, the whole thing. And learning everything, minute by minute, hour by hour, as to what was going on at the hospital, how the president, that after the surgery, what we learned, didn't announce to the nation that bullet was lodged 1 inch from his heart. And how he survived, maintaining a sense of humor, which is unbelievable. Being wheeled into the operating room, looking up at the doctor, saying, "I hope you're all Republicans." And they weren't, but who cares? They saved his life, did a great job. As a matter of fact, for 8 years, he maintained a personal correspondence with every one of those 8 doctors who saved his life. I mean, it was amazing. And then I was, as I said, in the sit room all day with members of the cabinet as they were gathered around to monitor everything, see what's going on overseas, what are the Soviets doing, what are our allies doing, what are the congressional leadership, keep them apprised, everything that went on. You learn a hell of a lot very quickly.
You definitely do. Wow. I mean, that was a great question, Peter, and I love it because you really got a lot of information out of her that I wouldn't have asked that question, and I really think that was a great one, and I didn't know that story that she almost died. So there goes the situation. So life after the Reagan administration, what made you want to write books? So you kind of take it based on specific national security issues is the reason why you write books. How did that come about?
That's right. Because so many, you watch it all unfold, and I thought, my first book, Checkmate. In fact, I have 5 out now. The 5th one was just recently released, called Trust But Verify, but my publisher also re-released the first 4 books, new covers, and I had to go back and revise and update them all because got to update the technology, right? Everything.
Exactly.
So yeah, I can't have my hero rushing into the Situation Room. That's the clatter of fax machines. I mean, come on, we got to update this. So the first story was inspired by Reagan's announcement of that missile defense program. So in the first book, I've got and they're continuing characters here in the stories. So I've got a woman who works for a defense contractor, and she invents a breakthrough technology for defense against cruise missiles, and bad guys trying to steal it and so forth. And in fact, after that book came out, a couple of years later, several things that happened in the book came true. I mean,
yeah,
it freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Then that one involved India and Pakistan because it fought 3 wars and they both have nukes and so forth. So that was that one. Then the second book was called Gambit, and that involved a totally different country. That one I was inspired by several things that happened. It was about attacks on commercial airliners with shoulder-fired missiles. There's a lot of those around. And in fact, way back, there was the shooting down of the Korean jetliner by Russians, in fact, with an American congressman on board. That happened during the Reagan days. And I remembered that and, thought about a story that kind of a spin-off there. And then the third book, Final Finesse, involves our energy supplies and some of the threats to those. I had also been fascinated with things happening in the Middle East and in South America and so forth. The fourth story, Castle Bravo, is about a very, very real threat that we're facing today, and that is the threat of an EMP attack. Maybe some of you have heard about that. And that is if a militant group, country doesn't like you, or you're out there, somehow gets hold of a small nuclear device. They're all trying, right? I mean, my gosh.
Exactly, yeah.
And they also get hold of a delivery vehicle. It could be as simple as a Scud missile, strap it onto it and shoot it off. And they're on a disguised fishing boat, let's say, for example, off one of our shores. And what they're going to do is they're not going to aim it at San Francisco or New York or Tampa, whatever, which would be devastating, of course. No, they're going to shoot it straight up in the air and detonate that sucker 50, 100 miles up. Scud goes farther than that. And what that does, that explosion way up in the atmosphere doesn't kill you right now. No, on the ground. What it does, it sends off shock waves that are called an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, which fries all the electronics on the ground. We would have no internet, no ATMs, no communications, computers, cell phones, no refrigeration, sanitation, transportation. And as one major general, we talked about this, said to me, and don't think our enemies aren't looking at it. This thing, an explosion like that would set us back to the year 1910. So I wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
And then the current book, Trust But Verify, the bad guys are Russian oligarchs. Now, that's based on a lot of true things going on, sanctions and whatnot. And they, in that story, have to figure out a way to replenish their coffers, right? Because they've lost a lot of money, sanctions and everything. So they decide that there is a way they could put a hit on a conference, which actually does take place every summer in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, sponsored by the Federal Reserve Board. I used to have a home in Jackson, so I know all about it. And everybody's there, finance ministers from around the world, and J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs are all there. So if something happened at a conference like that with those leaders, what would happen to the stock market?
Yeah.
It would tank, wouldn't it? I mean, my God. So the oligarchs and the mafia guys that are helping them short the exchanges massively. But how does my heroine, who works in the White House, teamed up with a special agent, special FBI agent, how would they ever find out about the plot? And if they could, how could they stop it? And, of course, that's the format of a thriller. That is Trust But Verify.
And what's really interesting, I'm looking at the back
Now you have
cover
the book.
of the I have the book right here in my hand, and I go to the back, and you get some great people that have really enjoyed reading this book, and you've gotten such great praise and congrats and all this so far. But I know I'm going to kind of turn this to Jason to ask some questions regarding this. But I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm going to give you a homework assignment. If you ever come on, my old show used to be an education show. So I'll give you a homework assignment, Karna. If you have time to watch Jack Ryan, if you've not had a chance, or either the Russians on Netflix, two very interesting ones that can look at how you could put your books together into screenwriting and have the opportunity to have it as a show. Because you seem like you have some really good stories.
I'd like to have them made into a movie. That would be great.
Yeah. But watch these things because they're my favorite. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm hooked on, the different things. And with your experience in the White House, you wouldn't imagine, especially with some of these TV shows, you'd be a great expert. But go, Jason, go ahead. I'm opening up the end questions and the storyline to go. Any question for Karna for the final moments of the show, or like 10 minutes of the show. So, Jason, what question would you ask Karna that has not been asked yet? I hit you with that one.
Well, there you go. How much of your books, as they're based on, or at least inspired by true events, how much clearance do you have to get from the government? Or do you still have to go back to the government to be cleared for different things that you want to put into your book?
It's funny. I've received that question. You go on book tours, and talk to people. Actually, I don't, because first of all, they are novels. So they're novels, and we say that at the outset. Number two, I am very careful. I don't have classified, things in there, or well, let me put it this way. Wait, I lied. A lot of things have been classified, but they have been declassified. I mean, even the title of the fourth book, Castle Bravo, was the title of a really a big deal classified project. And as soon as it was declassified, I stole the title. And it's called Castle Bravo. And there are certain tools and gizmos and things that my heroes have used in the books to stop the bad guys, okay? Weapons and things like that I have, I learned about through sources. I had friends at the Pentagon or friends, in the agency and so forth. But there are things that have just been declassified. So in the new book, Trust But Verify, the hero has a couple of gizmos that he uses. And I got that there's a great guy, a source that I've talked to over the years. I call him my Q. Remember the James Bond movie? There was always a guy, in a laboratory someplace that invented a pen that explodes or whatever. Okay, so this guy's my Q. He's great. He used to be at the Pentagon on the SecDef staff, and he told me about these or a couple of things that he hopes that the Pentagon will develop because they were prototypes. So yeah, things are in there, but I don't have to get clearance. And one other thing that I have mentioned, and that is when my very first book came out, some friends will often do this for an author. A couple of friends got together and you have a little book party, right? So a couple of friends got together and hosted a book party for me in D.C. And one of the couples who were the hosts were Linda and Bill Webster. They're good friends. Well, Bill was head of the CIA and the FBI, and I figure if Bill says it's okay, what the heck? I guess it's okay.
You have friends in high places for sure, and it's very, very interesting.
Well, good guy.
Yeah, I'm just, like I said, we could have so many different interesting questions with our guests tonight, and everyone needs to go pick up Trust But Verify or any of her books, and I'm hoping that some of these can get made into movies. So you keep up that goal for sure.
Listen, they're all on Amazon, and which would be great. But Neil, if I could just mention one little thing. If anybody wants to check out the stories and say, well, I don't know if I want to read these, or maybe I don't. Or easy way to read them. I do have a website. It's just my name. They want to check it out. They're all there. The little background and everything. It's just my name, KarnaBodman.com. It kind of an odd name, Karna, and then Bodman, like your bod, Bodman, KarnaBodman.com. Check out the website, because also what I've done for friends, I get some requests. They say, well, hey, I want an autographed book for a gift for somebody, but you don't want to mail a book back and forth to autograph it. But I have my own book plates, and they can just shoot me an email through the website. It's all there, and I will mail them an autographed book plate. It's, you peel off the backing, stick it in the book. Now you've got an autographed book.
A great idea,
so
for sure.
Easy.
All right, Peter.
Yeah, sure.
The question, you ever thought you get the opportunity? Peter's our younger co-host. Jason and I are in our later 40s, close to 50, while Peter's in his 20s. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Well,
go ahead. See, I had the 300 of the bus, Jason. But go ahead, Peter, with your question, because again, he was not alive in the Reagan administration. Jason and I were, but we weren't that old at that point. But go ahead, Peter, with the question.
Well, I was actually curious about one of your books and kind of some of the thoughts you had. In the sense of like an EMP and being prepared for, a possibility of that happening, how prepared would you say that we currently are or have been for that? I mean, are we completely unprepared in your opinion, or do you think there is some alternatives that if that were to happen, we'd be able to get back on our feet in a pretty, quick amount of time, or maybe even a little bit of time?
Peter, we're absolutely unprepared. We should be, but we're not. Now, we did have, some years ago, a group of fabulous scientists called the EMP Commission, okay? And they went up on the Hill, and they testified before the House committees and all of that. I even had copies of their testimony, and they made all kinds of recommendations of ways you could protect the electricity grids, for example, okay? And a lot of other things. And it wasn't that expensive at the time. My God, they were asking for something like $2 billion. I mean, God, that's a rounding error, at the Pentagon. Come on. And nothing was done. Everybody's, that's the future. We'll spend our money on other stuff. But during the Obama days, they even disbanded the commission, which was a shame. And now there are a number of congressmen who are interested, but there's so many ways that we should be protecting the grid, and we need to do more of that. In fact, another thing we need to do is to put more of our missile defense batteries, as we call them, systems on the East Coast. We don't have any. We've got a whole missile defense system out at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is out by Santa Barbara. So they've got some defense there on the West Coast, but nothing on the East Coast. And when it's been proposed in Congress, then a bunch of the other side said, oh, well, first we have to have an environmental impact report for building them. What would the environmental impact be of an EMP attack, I'm asking you? So they've been spinning their wheels on this. Air Force One is protected, okay, and some of our military areas are protected. Yes, they are. But the rest of us, good luck. So that's why I wrote this. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not good news. Now, Karna, one of the things I'm delving into in 2019 is the security industry. I'm involved with a company called Lensec now, and they do VMS software for security companies, integrating and all the different integrations and security from access control to all that stuff.
Good.
It's really an interesting process and journey where the security industry is going. Do you think that when we think about that budget for national or local, that should be a very important thing to spend the right money to protect us? That can you expound on that?
And we are, as far as I know. I'm not an expert in that field, but no, you're absolutely right, and I believe we are. I mean, Homeland Security has got major budgets for a lot of that, and we've got cyber protections going on all over the place at the NSA and the Pentagon and other places. But and we're pretty good at it, is my understanding. But we need to constantly be vigilant, because everybody around the world is working on this stuff, and it's very scary. It really is. I mean, look at just what happens to all of us just around. Things getting hacked all over the place, and getting warnings from different companies that have been hacked into, and that sort of thing. But mainly from a national security standpoint, yes. As a matter of fact, it was sometime, it was about many months ago, just before we had the conference, the first conference with the North Korean dictator. Just before that, when he was still shooting off missiles. Remember last year he was shooting off his missiles all over the place. I clipped a story out of the Wall Street Journal. I didn't see it anyplace else. I don't know why. He threatened an EMP attack to take out our electricity grid. That's one of the threats he made against us.
So that would be awful.
So there you go.
Exactly. Right. And they're thinking these ideas. Now, Jason, you get to throw probably last question to Karna. We'll see if there's any more time. We're almost running out of time, but go ahead. Last question for Karna.
Actually, I don't have a question. I apologize.
Okay, then I can.
I've just been enjoying the conversation.
You're enjoying
I enjoyed chatting with you guys and having a chance to relive some of these memories.
Oh,
it's really
it's so much fun.
It's great fun for me to sort of think back, and tell these stories, because I felt so honored to be able to work for President Reagan. And learn so much during those years, and because he did such a good job, I think, of explaining our policies. People called him the great communicator, and all of that. But in fact, that reminds me of one other thing. At the time, the Prime Minister of France, François Mitterrand, who didn't always agree with us, but still, he had a good line. He said, "It isn't just that President Reagan is a great communicator, though that he is. It is that he is in communion with the American people." Yeah. And I liked that.
All right, so now let's look at Reagan's administration versus Trump's administration in a way of asking a question. Were there as many people that hated Reagan as they hate President Trump right now, in your opinion, from being same?
Well, I mean, at different times. In the beginning, sure, after the assassination attempt, Reagan, had like a 80% approval rating or something like that. But I remember being on state visits over in France and Spain, and there were marches all over the place and barricades and things against Reagan. They were all upset about his wanting to deploy INF missiles in Europe as a protection, because Russia had 1,200 of them. We didn't have any, and they didn't want missiles on their land, and they were furious with us. And they were, Reagan was not a very popular person during many times. And of course, the press. My God, we had at least, I think, between 80 and 90% of the press had not voted for Reagan. They did some polls, and they found out there's nothing new there either. So sure, there were problems, but in general, with the general public, Reagan had a way of talking over the heads of the Washington press corps and going directly to local reporters, and whenever he'd travel around the country, and give talks. And he had a way of getting through to the people, and they saw what he was trying to do. We had our ups and downs, as was referred to earlier. There were problems here and there. We made mistakes. Every administration we make mistakes. But he did his best, and he loved this country. He truly did. And when you talk about similarities, sure, totally different communication styles. But
yes.
Bret Baier of Fox News wrote a terrific book that came out recently called 3 Days in Moscow, leading up to the that summit meeting in Moscow with Reagan and Gorbachev. And in it, he points out several similarities in terms of policies. Okay, tax cuts and regulations, being tough with our adversaries, and things of that nature. So I think from a policy standpoint, there have been a number of similarities. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these things shake out.
Interesting. And if you got a call to come in and consult for the Trump administration, would you say yes or no?
Oh,
great question.
No way. Good many more, many experts who would be terrific.
Oh, I tell you right now, you're very knowledgeable, and and definitely everyone needs to go to KarnaBodman.com right now, or go to Amazon and purchase Trust But Verify or any of the books. I appreciate you coming on, and
I appreciate being a guest on your show.
You are amazing. I mean, I probably could think of more questions, but one thing I would say is, this is again I don't work for FX, but you got to go ahead and watch the Russians. You'll love it, Karna. I'm telling you.
I will try to do that.
You should put it as a note because I'm telling you, just because they'll talk about what you do on a regular basis against the enemy. So take care, guys. I appreciate everybody calling. Take care, guys.